Let's review Entra ID and Entra Domain Services. These are two completely different services, but the Entra Domain Services can work together with your Entra ID directory. Now, this is an important part of AZ-900, but you don't have to have a deep knowledge of these different concepts. But I do want to show you a high-level view. So here you can see Active Directory, which is going to be on premises. It can synchronize with Entra ID. Now, this is a one-way synchronization where the users and the passwords are going to synchronize to Entra ID. From there, Entra ID can synchronize with Entra ID Domain Services as well as Microsoft 365. And you can see a little bit of that in the next slide. But what I want to show is Entra ID is not a replacement for Active Directory. It is used for single sign-on for Microsoft 365 products, such as being able to open up Outlook without being prompted again for username and password. Or it can be used for one-way synchronization between Entra ID and Entra ID Domain Services if you do want to replace Active Directory. So again, Entra ID itself is not a replacement, but it can lead to one. So let's take a look at Entra ID Domain Services. So what we do is, if we decide to use Entra ID Domain Services, that means all of our users are now in Entra ID. They've been removed completely in what's called a lift and shift to Entra ID. Active Directory is gone for on-premises. So since Entra ID itself is not a replacement, what are we going to do? Well, Microsoft has created what's called Entra ID Domain Services. Entra ID Domain Services is a complete replacement for on-premises Active Directory. However, it does cost more money. So if you're used to buying Active Directory on a Windows server and paying for it once and then not upgrading again for 3, 5, or 10 years, Entra ID Domain Services is going to be a rude awakening. It's going to cost money every month. In some cases, it's going to cost hundreds or thousands of dollars. For example, I did a test video one time just showing how to do Entra ID Domain Services from Entra ID, and just having it open for 2 days with only having a handful of users, it cost $300. So just to give you an idea, it's not a super popular product, but it is something that's important to know for the AZ-900 exam. So how does it work? Well, you're going to manage Entra ID Domain Services by using the directory that's in Entra ID. So for instance, if you're going to create a new user, you don't create that user in Entra ID Domain Services, you create the user in Entra ID. It then forwards the ID, username, the password, the multi-factor authentication information to Entra ID Domain Services. So how do you manage Active Directory itself? Well, Microsoft gives you 2 different virtual machines when you sign up for Entra ID Domain Services. And you can manage those using remote desktop, just like any other virtual machine that you may create yourself. Microsoft creates 2 new virtual machines. These virtual machines are Active Directory domain controllers in your domain and forest. You manage them by adding in the Active Directory tools in your on-premises server, or a virtual machine that you create within Microsoft Azure. And then you go ahead and open up Active Directory users and computers, DNS, everything like you would normally do with on-premises Active Directory. The positives of using Entra ID is you never have to upgrade it, you never have to patch it. It's all done for you in a software as a service type of a setup. All you have to do is create the users in Entra ID, and you go ahead and create the password, set up the multi-factor authentication, license those users in Microsoft 365, and then you can go ahead and start using them as if you had on-premises Active Directory. The disadvantage to Entra ID Domain Services is simply the cost, and that you have to always have an internet connection active, otherwise people cannot authenticate. Entra ID is recommended for a lot of different types of users and organizations. I've installed it many times myself. I've not had a lot of clients choose to use Entra ID Domain Services, mainly because of the cost and of the persistent internet connection, or you have the loss of authentication and authorization. An understanding of these 2 different types of databases and authentication schemes are going to be part of your AZ-900 experience.